Hey guys, Peter here to tell you about the debut record from Kerry King, From Hell I Rise, out May 17th on RPM. The album has 13 tracks, 47 minutes in length, and they are obviously an American thrash metal supergroup spearheaded by Kerry King. This is his solo project, but he surrounded himself with an incredible cast of musicians. Now, as far as the design is concerned, the album feels a little bit too long. I felt like the record had quite a bit of fat and it needed to trim it in order for the experience to be more compact, but also more intense, more aggressive, more abrasive to a certain degree. 9 songs, maybe 35, 38 minutes would have been absolutely perfect for a record that has these sound characteristics. Once you start to pushing it into 13 songs, 47 songs, it just feels like you're throwing everything at this album. You're trying to put there as much material as possible, but that's not necessarily a good thing because you're going to end up with some repetition. And this album, the longer it progresses, the more it feels like it's going around in a circle, the more it feels like you've heard some of these songs before, and it doesn't have that same impact that you feel earlier on in the album, and it starts to almost dilute itself as you progress down the line. Even though one of my favorite songs on this record is the closing track, From Hell I Rise. But between the opening track, Diablo, and the closing track, there is a little bit of moving around in circles with no clear vision of what the final destination is or what the purpose of the record is. And I felt like if you trim it down, if you cut it down, that purpose immediately comes to the surface, immediately becomes organic in the design of the record, and it gives incredible playability to the album, but would also give longevity to this record, allowing you to almost feel like every time you listen to it, you're listening to it for the first time. The way it sits, it loses its luster super quickly. Now, this has nothing to do with the quality of the sound and the production behind that same sound. This is just from an overall perspective in terms of the design of the album, in terms of what the album offers as an overall experience. Because when it comes to the production of this record, the album is well put together. You're able to hear all the different elements. This is not an album, while being very guitar driven and very guitar focused as you would expect, it's an album that still gives great moments of clarity to the drums, to the bass, to the vocals. Everything has a role to play, and they allow that role to be played extremely well and well defined as well, because the production enhances it and elevates it. Outside of the production, like I said, the guitars are one of the focal points of this record, and that is expected when you have Kerry King as the man behind it. Obviously, you're going to have great guitar solos. Obviously, you're going to have some old school moments of dual guitar solos, or starting a track with a solo really early, then bringing another solo section a little bit later on. It's an album that really lives off of the guitars, and it really showcases what Kerry King has always been all about. And obviously, the sound of Slayer comes through on this record. I mean, it's impossible to listen to this album and not make comparisons to Slayer, because this is a record that comes across as demo tracks that then make the cut of previous Slayer albums, and they were kind of kept in a shelf, and now it was time to bring them back and inject some life in them. That's not taking anything away from the quality of the songs, the quality of the sound, and the quality of the guitar work on this record. But that DNA, that Slayer DNA, that's pretty much Kerry King's DNA, it's impossible to separate the two. It's impossible to not see one and listen to the other. The two kind of come as a package, and that's something that the listener has to be aware of, and I'm sure the listener is aware of when you press play to listen to this record. But the guitar sound, the execution, the solos, the riffs, the melodies, the drive, the tempo, definitely top-notch as far as this album is concerned. Top-notch in terms of the sound, the quality, the execution, and the production behind it. Obviously, it doesn't end there. You have Paul Bostaff on drums, so you're going to get a heavy, thick drum sound that really helps shape the volume of the entire record. It really helps also the guitars be pushed into a different arena or be pushed forward, giving them more of a pedestal. The drums do that extremely well on this record. They elevate the guitar sound and give the guitar sound a boost, while compensating on the back end in order to really fill all the gaps and give this record quite a robust sound experience. A sound experience that still allows the bass to come through. You're going to hear it song in and song out. The bass really creeps in a few moments throughout this record, and I think that's important in order to give some darkness to the album, in order to also give some grooviness to the album, in order to create the right nuances and the right textures so that the album sound-wise doesn't just feel like it's guitars and drums from beginning to end. You need that bass to sometimes create some ripples within the sound to allow the listener to feel like there are a lot more ebbs and flows. Then when it comes to the vocals, you got Mark from Death Angel, and I thought he was perfect for this sound, for this record, for what Kerry King is trying to do. I cannot think of a better singer to fit into this project and deliver the way Mark delivered. His intensity, his range, his tonality, it reminds you once again of Tom Araya, it reminds you of Slayer. Not quite there, but close enough, and close enough that allows the sound in these songs to almost take you back into a different time and almost reminisce on those Slayer days. This album does that, regardless of what anybody says, regardless of what the intention was. This album has that interconnection with Slayer. I mean, Kerry King is in it. This is his solo album. Obviously, that connection is there. They're tied at the hip, and you're gonna find it on every single element. I was not expecting the vocals to be that close to it, but they are, and they work really well with the sound behind it. Like I said, a different style of vocals, I don't know if it would work. This one, Mark, his delivery works really well with these songs. It adds intensity and aggression, and that's a great thing because the sound already has it. Where I find this album is perhaps lacking, or perhaps what separates this album from a Slayer record, is that lyrically is not as dark, is not as well written, if you will. It doesn't have, it doesn't allow you to navigate through it almost as if you were reading a book. When it comes to the lyrics on this record, they're a little bit more superficial. They're not as deep, they're not as dark, they're not as punchy as they were on Slayer albums. So I think that is something that is going to be clear to all when you listen to this record, that from a lyrical standpoint, while there are a few darker songs on this album, where there are a few darker topics on this record, overall the album lacks a little bit in that field. It lacks a little bit of a punch in the gut when it comes to the lyrical content, and that lowers down not necessarily the aggression of the songs, but it definitely lowers down the darkness and intensity that could come from it. I think that with the design are probably the two softer spots on this record. Everything else I really enjoyed, and the connections with Slayer is something that I appreciate, being a big Slayer fan. Listening to some songs that it feels in my gut that never made previous Slayer records. I'm glad that they're seeing the light of day, if that's the case. If that's not the case, I'm still happy to listen to these songs and reminisce on what it used to be. But Kerry King did a phenomenal job from that standpoint in keeping some of that flame alive, and this record definitely does that. As far as favorite songs are concerned, I want to start off with Where I Reign. This is the second track on the album, but technically it's the first track because the opening track is an intro, Diablo, an intro that builds into this song. The two kind of go together. It's like part A and part B. And this track has that heavy tempo style that just comes in with great guitar sounds, with great solo sections, with a lot of aggression. Exactly how you want to start off the album. Kerry King bringing in his DNA into this opening track, if you don't consider Diablo the opening track, bringing it into this song and allowing this track to have an old school vibe, but at the same time to not feel dated, to feel modern, to feel connected with the present, with a chorus that's very memorable, with a bass that creeps in here and there in order to create some darkness, in order to definitely add some darkness to a song that lyrically does have some darkness to it. Not overly dark, but there is some darkness to it. So it's nice to see the bass kind of tag along for that lyrical darkness that the song has. And then obviously it's a song that's fast, aggressive, great guitar sound, great guitar solos, very guitar driven and very guitar focused, if you will, with a great vocal performance behind it. Next we have Trophies of the Tyrant. Interesting song. And the reason I say that is because the opening salvo of this song, the opening riff, sounds a lot like Amon Amarth Pursuit of Vikings. Not exactly like Amon Amarth Pursuit of Vikings, but for anybody that's heard Pursuit of Vikings, when you press play on this song, don't tell me that that doesn't creep up, that that song doesn't come into the back of your mind as this song develops. Not just how it opens, how it develops. Having said that, it's a song that moves more methodically, at least when you compare it with Where I Reign. Definitely moves slower, but that moving slower doesn't mean it loses anything as far as the heaviness is concerned. Still great solo sections, a lot of great guitar work throughout this entire track, a little bit groovier, a little bit more melodic, and a little bit more methodic, allowing that heaviness to feel and impact the listener differently. Vocally, very intense, very aggressive, but matching that more methodic nature of the track, allowing the overall song to still stay a lot more connected because of it. Last but definitely not least, From Hell I Rise, this is the closing song. One of my favorite songs in the bottom end of the record, one that I felt that it wasn't a repetition of something that I've heard before, something that felt fresh, and it was a really good closing song because it put an exclamation mark on the experience and on the record. It's a track that finishes the album perfectly. It has this great mixture of heaviness, thick guitar sound, thick drum sound, with some more penetrating guitar sounds, some more penetrating riffs, solos that add a little bit more explosiveness to the song, a song that mixes a little bit of a higher tempo with more of a mid-tempo. It's a track that constantly expanding and contracting, and I like the nature of the solos because it brought some brightness, some energy, some different focus than what the rest of the song sounds like guitar-wise. So it's a track that has great volume, great intensity, a sense of progression, great chorus, great vocals, perfect song to finish off the record. You're definitely finishing off on a high note when it comes From Hell I Rise. This is it, Kerry King's solo project, From Hell I Rise, out May 17th on RPM. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know your thoughts on the singles, on the record, on Kerry King, on Slayer, on whatever it is that you want to. Use the comment section below. I'll be reading those and getting back to you. Take care, guys.